that crooked? It looks crooked. All right, we're back. Video 2. Welcome back, everyone. Today, I'm going to be putting Starlink Gen 3 on the van and mounting it with 12 volt power. Even though it runs with 120 volt out of the case, we're going to do it without making any cuts or modifications to the actual Starlink dish. Unlike Gen 2, where you had to cut it, Starlink Gen 3, we're going to run it off of 12 volt, no cuts, no modifications, just as it comes in the package. Let's get into it. To accomplish this, we're going to be using a mount that comes from Trio Flatmounts, also known as Tim and Katie on YouTube. They're an awesome YouTube account. Not sponsoring this at all. I just really enjoy the content that they make, and I've learned a lot from them. I've designed my shower and a lot of the components of my van around their build. So I'm happy to have purchased this flat mount and support their channel. I'll link them below in the comments. So I purchased their Gen 3 standard speed mount, which is this super rad 3D printed mount. Super lightweight, seems super durable. So you can mount this in a couple different configurations, although they have an instructional video on their website on how to mount it. But this was engineered by them, produced by them, printed by them. So if you purchase one of these, it helps them continue to support other van lifers and put out great content. I also purchased their 12 volt Starlink conversion kit, which this is a 12 volt to 56 volt converter. So basically it comes with a positive and negative lead on one end where you'll connect to any 12 volt power source. I'm going to be connecting mine to my house battery, but you could do a cigarette lighter. And on the other side, it comes out a 56 volt input that you can just put right into the Starlink power input. And the converter has mounting holes, so you can just drill it into any interior cabinet or anywhere that's convenient for you. The mounting kit also comes with hex bolts, which you love to see. As a mountain biker, hex bolts, they don't strip as easily and you can really torque them down nicely. That I'm going to be mounting it onto my Flatline Vanco standard roof rack with quarter 20 bolts. And with that, let's get into the install. So I should specify that this install is specifically for the Gen 3 Starlink. I had Gen 2 and they gave me an option to return it for a partial refund. And there are 3 major issues I had with the Gen 2 Starlink. Come on. So I had the Gen 2 Starlink on this pole mount, mounted to 2 crossbars on my Flatline Vanco standard roof rack. And it was convenient enough. The issue was that it stood super high up off of the roof. So I guess you technically could have driven with it, but it was at least 1.5 feet taller than your roof. I'd have concerns with wind resistance. I'd have concerns with the motor kind of moving around. And it's not really great. It's not a good look. You don't want to be driving around in public with this giant thing sticking up off your roof. I was keeping the cable in this waterproof box, which I bought from Home Depot. They sell these at any hardware store. Great if you need a solution like this where you're keeping an exposed cable end outside. Make sure that cable end doesn't receive power when you're keeping it outside. Otherwise, this worked great. So good that I can't get it open. Okay. My second issue is that when Starlink Gen 2 would start up, it would take at least 15 minutes to get online. And because I couldn't drive around with it, I had to set it up, take it down, let it load, 15 minutes to get online. Sometimes you're driving around and you have a meeting coming up. It's just not practical to have to wait for 15 minutes for it to connect. And I really wanted a solution that could just be on and off, no setup, didn't have to expose myself to the cold, and something that just worked consistently. My third and biggest issue with Gen 2 Starlink was this proprietary cable that just was the flimsiest thing ever. I've gone through 3 of these, and you can see this one's fraying. I'm pretty sure this one stopped working. Just the angle that you push it in, the cable comes out at an angle and it gets bent, it's flimsy, and it would just stop working and my Starlink would stop connecting, and it left me pausing my Starlink for months at a time and just not using it. So we're gonna get all this cable and pole mount junk out of here, and we're gonna mount the Gen 3 Starlink here, flat, totally low profile, and in a way that it can always be running on 12 volt. So I got a brand new Starlink cable for Gen 3, and the super rad thing about these Gen 3 cables is that they're just Ethernet cables. I already crunched one cable in a cabinet, totally my fault. So I had to buy a replacement. But in the meantime, with Gen 2 proprietary cables, if I broke a cable, I had to wait to get it replaced until they got a shipment out to me, which in a van is super inconvenient. When I broke my Gen 3 cable, I was able to go into Best Buy and get a Cat 6 Ethernet cable for $7 and be back on the road with Starlink up and running, fully working. The big bonus that you get with these Gen 3 cables is that they do have waterproofing kind of seal around them. So I would still use the Gen 3 Starlink cable over an Ethernet cable whenever possible. But if you get in a pinch and you crush one of these cables, you can hop down to Best Buy, you can use an Ethernet cable and it'll work just the same. I am going to be running this cable through the roof using a scan strut pass-through, which basically is like a little kind of metal cover on either side of this rubber grommet where you can drill a hole, pass a cable through, and that way if you ever have to pass more cables through the roof in the future, you can just take this off, drill a new hole, run the cable through, you're good to go. I got this from 70 Savage, and I'll link his channel in the comments below. He has a ton of useful content on his channel as well. I've learned a ton from him, so I want to give him proper credit where the credit is due. All right, so I think I'm gonna find my placement for where I'm gonna have the Starlink go. So I think I'm gonna run it sideways, somewhat like this. So I've run my cable through the roof, and I'm just gonna pull out a length that roughly gets me there, and then I can zip tie enough to the side so it's all neat and tidy. Right around there looks good. I'm gonna give myself a little extra. So I've got my cable running through the roof. Gonna put the grommet over it, and then I'm going to put this cover over the rubber piece. There. Nice. So when the grommet gets pushed in and tightened down, any little gaps kind of get filled in. Now just toss the screws back in. And just like that, we have a new Starlink cable run through the roof. I'm going to be attaching the Trio Starlink Speedmount to the Gen 3 Starlink. So pretty easy. Each piece has a number to it, and the Starlink, once upside right, should be sitting facing up on the kind of narrow side here. There's a thicker end that should be facing down. I have the Starlink upside down right now just so I can see the numbers, but otherwise it's pretty straightforward. Slides on right, nice and tight. Right on. Awesome. I'm really impressed with how nice and tight of a fit that is. I'm really psyched that they're using hex bolts. It's a super simple install. Just gonna toss 4 bolts in the sides. Love this because it's non-invasive to the Gen 3 Starlink. Perfect. And there it is. Really thin profile, non-invasive mounting plate for the Gen 3 Starlink. I have these corner holes here where I can put bolts through, and I'm going to be mounting this to my Flatline Vanco standard roof rack. Now you can get bolts that come with this. So these come with a 65mm bolt, M8 I believe. Comes with a washer and a nut in the end. Now my Flatline Vanco standard roof rack has 1/4 T-nuts in the crossbars. So I just came from Ace Hardware, and 65mm is just around 2.5 inches. So I picked up 2.5 inch 1/4 bolts, 4 of them, and they go right through these corner holes, no problem. So let's get back on up to the roof and we'll mount this on up there. Alright, so now we're back up on the roof, and this is the very last part of our outdoor install. It's still snowing a little bit, but we're gonna just knock this out so we can get inside the van and wrap up the 12 volt conversion part. So I've loosened up one of my crossbars here on my Flatline Vanco standard roof rack, so I can slide it all around. And I got 2 quarter 20 T-nuts. It's gonna more or less sit like that. So I can pull this bar over. I know that the inner track here, T-nuts are in the inner track, so I'm gonna sit it there, kind of measure out where I'm gonna put it. Pull this bar, tap it in a little bit. Sweet. So more or less, it's gonna sit like that on my roof. I kept my cable nice and dry. I'm gonna plug it in. There's currently no power going to this, but that'll be the last time I ever have to plug that in. So I'm gonna get these T-nuts lined up with the holes on the first side. Great. And I got 4 2.5 inch quarter 20 bolts. Go right through the corners. Line up the second ones. All right. There's 4. Just like that, we have Starlink on the roof. And I'll toss a couple of zip ties in here to kind of clean up the cord, but I'll do that when it's not raining. Trio flat mount, super sleek. Doesn't come any higher than my Dometic air conditioner. Really awesome job engineering here and printing a really lightweight, clean looking mount. Starlink is mounted, and as you can see, the cable runs through a waterproof entry, and that's the finished product. All right, so we're now back in the van. We finished the Starlink roof install, and we are now going to connect the Starlink to 12 volt power. Now, if you're planning on just running Starlink off of 120 volt, you could plug it in just as it came in the box right now and it'd work. But we set out to run Starlink off of 12 volt, so let's get that set up right now. To do this, you're gonna need the 12 volt converter sold from Trio Mount. It's a 12 to 56 volt converter. Now, Starlink needs 56 volts to run, and it is more efficient to go from 12 volt up to 56 volts rather than go from 12 volt to 120 volt back down to 56 volts. So just for maximum efficiency, we're going to be running this. It comes with a 12 volt input with 2 wire leads, and if you aren't sure how to wire 12 volt and you want to include this in your van, maybe you bought it pre-built, I'll show you how to do that. And it has a 56 volt output on the other end. We're gonna screw it right into a wall, has 4 mounting points. All right, so I shut off my 12 volt power on the van. I have a full system shutdown switch, as well as shutting off the solar panel disconnect, which is super important because after you shut down your 12 volt battery bank, your solar panels might still be pulling electricity into the system. So you wanna make sure when you do any sort of electrical work, you have no electricity flowing through the system. I have a little utility closet where I built out my shower, and I have a little space to hang some of my clothes. And I just hung all my clothes on my shower head. So let's take a look at the utility closet. So up here, these are all the wires for my Peplink Max Transit Duo. That's for my cellular internet. We're not going to bother with any of that. And here is where I ran the Starlink cable down. So I have it just running down, and I tucked the rest of it behind the wall here just for safekeeping. I have the end of that cable right here, which we will be plugging into the Starlink router. First things, we're going to mount the 12 volt to 56 volt converter on the wall. I have my router for my cellular internet mounted to the wall here. So I think I'm going to mount the 12 volt to 56 volt converter somewhere right around here. Now to mount this, you're going to want 4 number 8 wood screws. Depending on your wall thickness, you'll either want 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch. My walls are only 1/2 inch thick, so I'm using 1/2 inch screws. All right, that's all screwed in. Next, I have a little bit of 12 gauge, 12 volt wire. We're gonna connect it to the 12 volt converter. You wanna use one of these alligator clips. I'll link these in the description below. But basically, these clips, they come in 2, 3, 4. You can connect a bunch of cables together. I recommend only doing 2 or 3. Basically, these clips open up and they clamp down on a wire. And they have a small little metal strip at the top when they clamp down that connects all of the wires. I'm using a 3-way connector here only because I don't have any more 2-way connectors, but it doesn't really matter if you leave one space unused. You may also notice that I'm using marine rated wire. So this has a water resistant coating and it comes wrapped around both 12 gauge wires. This is going to be a little bit more expensive than your simplex that you'll find at Home Depot, but I really believe this is a must for a van, especially when vans can get condensation or other rattling and vibration where it's unexpected. So I'm going to leave a link to this on Amazon. I think if you are going to splurge on one thing, it's going to be getting this marine grade 12 gauge wire. And sure, you can go with cheaper 14 gauge or even 16 gauge. I use 12 gauge everywhere so I could buy it in bulk. So to connect to these, I'm going to take my positive end. Keep in mind this is a cable that has no power going to it. And I'm going to twist it up so it's nice and clean. I'm just going to insert it into the clamp, close that. I'm going to take the positive end of the voltage converter and I'm going to push that into another open slot here, close that. Now both of them are tightly connected. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the negative wires with a separate connector. Insert the cable, the negative cable into the connector, close the clamp, nice and strong. And I'm going to take the negative end of the voltage converter, push it in, close the clamp, nice and strong. So what we're now left with is a nice extension of this 12 volt cable, which I will be running up to a 12 volt line that I know has a very low amperage load on it already. Now this 12 gauge wire is good for technically up to 20 amps. I don't run any of my lines above 15 amps. And so this line, which has about 3 amps max on it right now, so I have some wiggle room to add on extra loads, which I did intentionally for the purpose of expansion for something like this. Now the Starlink Gen 3 will use around 60 watts, which is about 5 amps on 12 volt. So that will bring the total of this line up to 8 amps, which is well within the safe threshold. I've already added a 10 amp fuse to this line, so we should be good to go. Keep in mind when cutting into the line, it is super crucial that you have no electricity running through the line. I'm going to take off some of this coating. Now that we have our line cut, let's do the positive first and then the negative. We're going to expose some of that positive wire coming from the battery side. We're going to cut some of the continued wire, expose some of that. Great. All right, now we're going to take one of our 3-way Wago alligator clamps. We're going to twist up the battery side positive, nice and clean. Insert it into the clamp, close the clamp, nice and tight. I'll take the continued positive for that line. Make sure all the strands are twisted up nice and tight for a good clean connection. Insert that in, close it, nice and tight. And now we're gonna take the positive end from our voltage converter line that we extended. We're gonna put that in the 3rd spot of this alligator clamp. Just to make my life a little bit easier, I'm going to cut a little bit more of this marine cover off. So now we have our battery side positive coming in, and that distributes the positive line to both the continuation of that line and to our voltage converter. Now we'll do the same with the negative. Take our final 3-way connection, make sure those strands are all nice and tight. Close battery side, close the continuation of the line, finally the voltage converter. Great. And now our voltage converter has 12 volt power. I'll no longer need to use my Starlink power brick as the voltage converter replaces it. And you'll notice that the voltage converter and the power brick have the same end here. So I'll still hang on to the power brick in case I ever need to use Starlink on 120 volt. But for now, we have no use for it in the van. So I have my Starlink router here, which I can now take. Again, the power is off. I I can now take my voltage converter and plug into the back of the Starlink power here. I can take my Starlink cable that I ran through the roof and plug it in to Starlink. Now all that's left to do is turn the power back on and Starlink will be running on 12 volt. All right, power's back on and we are online. So Starlink is running off of 12 volt and connected, and it's currently downloading an update. If we scroll down to alignment, remember it's flat mounted on my roof, and you'll see it says Starlink tilt is incorrect, but otherwise that really doesn't impact the speed all that much. So let's run a quick speed test, and there's download going, so I don't think it'll be optimal. And you'll see we get about 159, 160 megabits per second download, 26 milliseconds latency, which is awesome, and around 15 megabits per second upload. So once that download stops, I'm sure that will improve, but I can confirm that this setup works while moving. I do not recommend that you use it while running, as you void the warranty, but for anyone curious, it does work while moving. Last but not least, the super rad thing about Gen 3 Starlink is that it has 2 Ethernet ports. I can take my Ethernet cable, plug it right into the back there, and take the other end of my Ethernet cable and plug it directly into my Peplink Max Transit Duo. And now I can have Starlink as a satellite internet solution in combination with my Peplink Max Transit Duo cellular internet solution, and have internet virtually anywhere I can drive. I hope this has been a helpful video for you to get Starlink up and running on 12 volt power, flat mounted on the roof of your van. If there's anything else you'd like me to show or explain about my van build, leave me a message in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to make a video on it shortly. If you're not already, subscribe to the channel and hit that little thumbs up button, and I'll catch you in the next one.